We made it as a guest lecture series, actually. So yeah, welcome to the guest lecture series organized by the Microeconomics Research and Dashboard, Faculty of Economics and Business Universitas Gadjah Mada. We usually call it McDash. My name is Keisha. In case those who haven't met me or haven't really seen me either offline or online. So my name is Keisha and I'll be the moderator of this event, but I'm also the facilitator of the development economics class, which is part of this event. So this guest lecture is also part of the international undergraduate program development economics class session, which is under my supervision. And yeah, for this reason, because it's part of the IUP program development economics class, that's why this event will be conducted in English, but please do not worry. For those who would like to engage in the discussion, Q&A sessions later on, and you would like to address or raise your questions or comments in Bahasa, that's also fine. So I'm going to accommodate everyone using any language, but only two languages actually, Bahasa and English. Well, a little bit of Korean I can, but no German. I think that's Kiki's. Well, you can do German. I think Kiki will understand. But yeah, I can only accommodate Bahasa and English. And since this guest lecture is open for public, and thank you so much for those who are really enthusiastic for this event. But anyway, since we have public participants, so for those of my students, especially my development economics students, both from the IUP program or from the regular program, do not forget to change your profile name, because I promise you again some incentives. So again, Kiki, I'm giving them incentives if they're engaged in the discussions sessions later on. Please change your profile name with the format that I instructed yesterday through semester. But other than that, I think without further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Rizky Noli Siregar, or we call her Kiki. So she's an old friend of mine. We were classmates during our undergrads time at FEB-UI. And apparently Kiki is doing a postdoc as a postdoc researcher, so she's still in the path of academics, which is good. That's why I invited her to give a guest lecture for my development economics class, because our topic for this week is about trade and development, and she is a trade expert. But yeah, for those who haven't really known Kiki, just a brief introduction about Kiki actually from me. So yeah, Kiki graduated from Boston University for her master's degree in economics, and then she just recently graduated from UC Davis for her PhD in economics. She was a research assistant for several famous economists / former minister in Indonesia, such as Mr. Khatib Basri, Ibu Mari Alkapangestu. And then right now, Kiki is doing her postdoctoral researcher, chair of international economic policy at University of Mainz, Germany. And I would like to go on and on about Kiki's publications and awards, because yeah, she's one of my favorite friend, because she's very, very intelligent. My smart friend, one of my smartest friend during my batch. But I'm sure we really, really want to hear from Kiki and share knowledge and also learn from you, Kiki. So I guess I'm just going to give you the floor, and the time is yours then, Kiki.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Keisha, for such a flattering introductions, which I feel ashamed each time it's too flattering for me. But Keisha, yes, we are very old friends. Back when we were like the students here, we studied together. So I'm very glad, I'm very happy and honored to be invited for her class. I'm currently in Jakarta too, so it's not a big deal in terms of time difference. So yes, for such also just a disclaimer, since this is an economic development class, and also we open it for public. So, and actually the intention was that because the topic will be quite basics, so I hope this is something that can give some kind of basic understandings on how trade and development goes hand in hand, or what's challenges between these two big theme in economics. Yeah. So please, also I'm very open to any question anytime. If you don't have to wait for a specific Q&A session, which we will have, but anytime you feel like confused, just unmute yourself and ask questions, or just put your question on the chat and ask. Okay. So just a brief, just before we start, it's nice to meet you here. I see lots of names, including some of my friends. I hope I don't disappoint you guys. So I just want to check in. How are you? So I'm being very, just kind of like the millennials way of being interactive. You can scan the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and then enter gains from trade hashtag. And yeah, this will be anonymous. I just want to, just warm up to see how are you doing. I think this is active already. You can enter it. Let me also do it on my phone. You can do it on your phone, or you can also use your laptop. I think some of you may feel that, wait, what's the chat? Yes, Slido gains from trade. You will find out that gains from trade is a very big jargon in international economics, and I'm being nerdy and of using that term. Is it active? Can we see whether?
Yeah, it's active. We can just type it then.
Okay. Yes. Please enter. Doing well and excited. I'm barely here. I'll just ngantuk. Fine, thank you. Very good. Doing well. Not so good. Oh.
Can we reveal who answered ngantuk? Is it one of my students?
The students just got a quiz and just got like some big questions from
They
I understand.
After that,
you can take, for the students, you can take some coffee or tea and then just let me, and watch me entertain you guys. But after this, we will ask the questions. Butchered my presentations. It was good. Like I was in the presentations of the students. You were just being, kind of nervous, I think, and many of you guys talk so fast, which I feel like, wow, people talk so fast, but I'm mostly amazed. Superman, feeling sexy. I think this is my friend, not your student. Alive, so good. Sounds good. Really, thank you for your participation. This is also to test whether the Slido actually work or not. Okay, so next question. Since we are going to talk about international trade, I think one of the most the biggest jargon in international trade is globalizations, right? So I just wonder, what does come into your mind when you hear globalizations? So how do you define, or what kind of example that you can take if you want to pinpoint, oh, this is what globalization is about? K-pop, good. The world, good, interesting. Borderless, yeah. Although the pandemic kind of makes us feel, well, the virus globalized. The virus really know how to do globalization, right? No more barriers, BTS, Liberty, McDonald's, and Coca-Cola. Inclusion, interesting, inclusion. Some people may feel that one of the problem is inclusivity in globalization, but yes, one of the benefit, the virtue can be inclusion. Eroding local culture, interesting. I think this is one of my artist friends. I see one of us seniman here. Exchange of goods and better connectivity, good. Third wave of globalization is data. everywhere. It's interesting that MACD is kind of like the epitome of, for Indonesians, right? For at least for this crowd, as you know, the sign of, or the symbol of globalization, on top of K-pop and BTS. International trade, neoliberalism, neolib. Okay. Well, I'm not going to go further on ideology, so I'm going to be very pragmatic here, just to give a disclaimer. Kind of the same culture everywhere. Interesting. It's interesting. Maybe this is because I'm talking with Jogja students, like where culture is a very big thing in Jogja. I wonder whether the kind of same answer will be also if I ask this at UI, for example. No localizations. Interesting. Fast news. Yes. So kind of like authenticity versus uniformity. Wow, this is very kind of like social media generation kind of answer. Like, I understand that everything becomes kind of uniform when the same culture globalizes, right? Changing preferences, liberty, TikTok. Okay. This is all really, really good. So progress. Whoa. Any other thing? Any other idea about globalization? Exchange. Okay. I think I read a free trade area. Okay. It's interesting also that no one mentioned WTO, for example. That kind of shows how irrelevant maybe the institution has become in this generation. Interesting. Okay, very good. I really appreciate this. So I will have more questions, but before that, let's go to the theory, like some theory. So I hope now I can share my iPad. I need to mirror this. Okay. So apologies if I will go back and forth between seeing you guys and seeing my iPad, but it is just how it is. I don't know how to do it better. So, I should do it from here. So what is globalization? All of your answers are all, of course, correct. If I can summarize it, we can call flows of goods across border, flows of services. So it's not only like when we export palm oil and then we import clothes from China, but it's also when we export, for example, tourism, and we import perhaps some IT services, right? Or call center services. So those are part of flows of services that go through across border, flows of capital. So for example, we see several we can get how you call it, some big companies do IPOs not only in their home base but also in New York Stock Exchange. So it means that you can get capital from other parts of the world. Flows of people, so people migrate from one place to another. Like I'm now one of an international migrant part of this class. Flows of ideas. That's why I think many of you also mentioned that people have some kind of uniformity, eroding of local culture. So all of them are correct. However, to make things simple, since this is basic, and I think today we will focus more, and I'm sorry about this, I'm not going to entertain every type of flows, but we're going to focus more on flows of goods and services. So what we generally call exports and imports, right? So why I think this is important, because it has been an amazing period of exponential growth of world trade. So here I present you the world trade data. Like this is in values in billion US dollar between 1950 to 2020. So this is around the past 70 years. So we can see that up until 1970s and then 1980s, it's kind of like relatively stagnant, but we can see an exponential growth in the 1980s, 1990s, some dips during the global financial crisis here. So use different color. And also here, when we have what happened here. So this is global financial crisis. Here we have, what crisis we have in 2017? I kind of forgot. Any idea? Maybe the end of commodity boom, because this is in values, right?
Yeah, is that the one in 2015?
No?
Yeah, I think it's around 2014, 2012. So this is the end of commodity boom. So when the price of commodity increased a lot in this time, actually this time. And then it got corrected during the 2014, 2015. And then we have another dip here during the pandemic, right? But overall, we can see an amazing exponential growth in world trade, right? Of course, there are many reasons behind it. One of them, as what you said, countries becomes borderless, and there are more free trade areas. It's easier to trade between each country because transportation cost has gone down. Tariff has gone down as we introduced WTO in 1995. Also, communication cost has gone down, but also the emergence of global value chains. It means that before we only trade final goods. So for example, Indonesia trade a final good of, I don't know, maybe clothes, and then we import machine, right? But now with the global value chains, to make one iPhone or one iPad or one computer, some parts are made in Japan, some parts are made in Thailand, some parts are made somewhere else, and then these flows are being counted again and again, right? And to make one particular product. So that's why the world trade values has gone up exponentially. So, but why it matters? Now that we talk about trade and development, the next question is then why it matters, right? Why we trade, and what's the impact of trading with each other or with other countries? So I think if we want to jot down three main questions, is that first, can countries benefit from interacting with each other, right? So whether this is something that benefit the countries, right? Especially now that there are so many protectionism and there is an emerging protectionism everywhere, then it means that maybe international trade is not as reliable as before, right? But the idea is then eventually, of course, each country would like to prosper, right? So whether it benefit the countries. Second, do countries benefit from more integration? So if we reduce trade costs, if we reduce border, whether it actually becomes better, right? The last one, when there is harm from such integration, which we heard in many anecdotal evidence, and some studies also show that, why is that so, right? Why we see some disappointment to world market or disappointment from globalizations. So that's what we are trying to cover. This is a big topic, but let me just provide some brief fundamentals, I think, and then I will not give you a specific answer to all of this, but I think it hopefully becomes, it creates new questions for you guys to think about this issue. Okay, so let me start with, since this is a class, I'm going to do some theory. So let me start with a simple trade model. This is very famous, called Heckscher-Ohlin model. So it's a very simple environment. It has a very simple environment. Imagine we have an economy of two countries, let's say country A and country B, two goods or two sectors. For example, one agriculture sector, one manufacturing sector, or basically, for example, we only use clothes and bread, or basically only two goods. Two factors of productions. So for example, to make any of this good, you only use labor and capital, or labor and land. So imagine there are only two inputs, yeah? So the main idea of trade comes down to what we call comparative advantage. What does it mean? Comparative advantage, by definition, is basically when you produce a good or services at a lower opportunity cost compared to the alternatives. It means that, what does opportunity cost mean? Not many, maybe some of you here are not economic students. Basically, opportunity cost is that the net benefit that you forgone. So instead of using your time or resources to produce this, you can produce the other. So the benefit of that other is the opportunity cost of producing what you produce. So that's comparative advantage. What sometimes people confuse with is absolute advantage, which means that production of goods and services using the same amount of resources, but at a lower cost. So in absolute advantage, what matters is just the price, like the cost, like how much you spend to produce one particular good, yeah, compared to others, right? But what determines trade is actually not the actual cost, but the comparative advantage, yeah? Let's see how does it look like. So imagine we have two countries, country A and country B. There are only two sectors, one sector producing cloth, the other sector producing bread, yeah? Imagine that in this country, first, they don't trade with each other, yeah? So what they produce, they consume. And they can only consume things that they produce, okay? So imagine during this autarky condition, we call it autarky or no trade. The price of cloth in country A is 1, and the price of bread in country A is 2. So the relative price of cloth relative to bread in A is 1/2, right? Meanwhile, in country B, the relative price of cloth and the relative is in B is 3/2. So we can see here the relative price of cloth is cheaper in country A compared to country B. So imagine if the two countries trade to each other, of course, then the price, the equilibrium world price will be somewhere in between, right? So PC, PB of A will be smaller than, let's say, PC, PB, or the relative price of cloth. I put star to make to indicate this is an equilibrium price when they trade with each other, to be between the two, right? In this case, imagine if country A start from half and the relative price of cloth is half and the relative price of cloth in B is 3/2, of course, country A would like to sell something that gets higher price when they trade, right? So in this case, country A has comparative advantage in producing cloth, okay? Meanwhile, country B has a comparative advantage in producing bread, because if we see the other relative price, PC in B, which is 2, is bigger than A, PB, PC in B, which is 2/3, right? So if country A and B trade, country A will export cloth, because then the world price becomes higher for them. Meanwhile, country B will export bread, because for country B, the price of bread increases, right? So that's why in actually also in the real world, each country has their own at least one comparative advantage. Okay, so there should be always some incentive or some benefit from trade. So let's see what changes when they start to trade. So I need to explain a little bit what is going on here. So I took this from a textbook with Todaro and Smith, but not country A and country B. Let's imagine this is country A, yeah? And in both country A and country B, they can produce either agriculture or manufacturing, yeah? So the horizontal axis is how much agriculture products that they can produce. And in the vertical axis is how many manufacturing products that they can produce. Meanwhile, this PP line shows what we call production possibility frontier. What does it mean? it means that at every single combination in this point is the most efficient combination of producing manufacturing products and agriculture that the country can produce using their resources. So they can produce this high manufacturing and this high agriculture, or they can also produce somewhere here, which means that they produce less of manufacturing, but more agriculture, okay? So that's PPF. So before they trade with each other, so we need to find an autarky condition. So let's see, where is it? This should be less developed country world, but country A, let's just call it country A. The domestic price ratio is this line, right? So the optimal production happens when this line is tangent or just touch the PPF. Where is it? It is on this point A, okay? So since they are in autarky, point A means not only production point, but also consumption point, right? So point A is production and consumption in autarky. So we can also imagine there is another line that shows how happy they are. We call it indifference curve. So there are, for example, this indifference curve, the higher to the right top, the more happy the people are in the country A. So imagine that in this point A, there is an indifference curve like this that gives a utility of UA. Let's call it that way, okay? So now the country A and country B can trade with each other. So the international price ratio changes, right? So it becomes more steeper because PA and the relative price of agriculture increases, yeah? So now where do they produce? Of course, again, where they produce, the optimal position or the optimal combination is where the price line tangent to or touch the PPF. So where is it? It is on point, is it B? Yeah, point B. So the B is production point under free trade. Okay. Meanwhile, since they can trade with country B, they don't have to consume exactly at point B. They can trade, so they can export some of the agriculture products that they produce and then import some of the manufacturing product that they cannot, that they want to consume. So they can consume anywhere along the international price line. So here, let's say it's on consumption point C. So we can see that the indifference curve there now is higher. So now they consume at C. So C is consumption point under free trade. Yeah. So we can see that this should be UC. UC is higher than UA, meaning that the people are happier than before under U. So under free trade, people have higher happiness compared to autarky. And that's what we call gains from trade. Meaning that, and it can come from two parts. One, the people can produce what they are good at, which is in this case, country A can produce more agriculture, something that they're really good at compared to the rest of the world. And then they can consume something that they cannot make really good, but at a cheaper price. In this case, they can import manufacturing. So that's good for country A. Let's see what happened to the trading partners, which is country B. So here, let's say this is country B, which is better and which has a comparative advantage more in manufacturing compared to the agriculture. So as just before, we see PP as the PPF of country B. So that's where they can produce at the most efficient. before the trade, the domestic price ratio is this one. So under autarky, the production and consumption should be where at this where the price line just touch the PPF, which is at point B, right? Point B. So this is autarky, production, and consumption, right? So imagine in this case, there is another indifference curve that shows how happy the people are. Let's say this is U0, yeah? So now when they they open up to trade, the international price of agriculture relative to manufacturing goes down, right? So this goes this way, right? So now they can consume. They don't have to consume what they produce, right? So let's find where they produce. It should be where. I think I got something wrong. No. This is correct. No, I was wrong, right? Because I wasn't using the international price ratio. Sorry, guys. I didn't see it correctly. So sorry. Let's start from scratch. Where is the domestic price? This is the domestic price. So the production and consumption under autarky is under this price, which is at point A. Right? This is autarky, production, and consumption. And imagine there is an indifference curve of UA. Yeah, that's how happy they are. Now the international price ratio becomes this one. Let me just use different color. So now the production should be where that line just touch the PPF, which is B. Right? So B is free trade production. Okay? But since they are open up to trade, they don't have to consume at point B. They can consume anywhere on that new international price. So here, for example, there is an indifference curve that just touch C. So C here is free trade consumption. And we can see UC is higher than UA. So people are also happier in this country, right? So this is what we call gains from trade. So things look super, super beautiful and so far, right? Everyone just trade with each other. Why don't people trade with each other? Why don't we see people trade with each other in the real world? Why people become more protectionist under the theory, right? First, yes, some people will say, but everyone do in that each country, do people lose or do people gain or is there someone that lose? Yes, there are distributional impacts. So who gains? Of course, export sector. So for example, in country A, this is the agriculture sector. In country B, it's the manufacturing sector. And the factors used intensively in that sector. So for example, if agriculture sector use intensively land, so landowners is the one that are being that benefit from trade in country A. Yeah, but who loses is the import sector. So in country A, this is the manufacturing sector, and the factor used intensively in the sector. So if manufacturing use labor intensively, so labor in country A is the one that loses. However, if we compute the gains and the loss between the two, the net gain of trade is positive. That's why we see the indifference curve, the happiness increase, right? For everyone, right? There is a net positive gain, okay? So of course there are some gains and losses, but if we calculate everything, then it's a net positive. The model seems quite realistic, but then there is another complication. The implication of the previous model is that complete specialization, right? So in that model, we see that country A will only export agriculture and import manufacturing. But in the real world, we see that countries export and import the same product, right? For example, Indonesia exports and imports clothes, right? So how can we explain that? Or maybe, for example, Germany, they export and import both cars. They export BMW, but also imports, I don't know, Ford, for example, or Toyota, right? So can we do better? Yes, we can. And most textbook will stop here actually, but I feel like trade economists are always being questioned, being not relevant. So let's become more relevant in this modern world. So how can we improve the model? First, let's assume that firms in each industries are heterogeneous. What does it mean of being heterogeneous? It means that despite you have an industry and there are many firms, different firms may be different in terms of their productivity level. Some firms are very productive, some are less productive, okay? So most of the time, if we see the data also, this is what's happening in the real world. Usually there are few high productive firms, only a couple of productive firms, and a lot of low productivity firms, yeah? So how can we take into account these facts, these empirical facts into the model? So let's assume that each firm pays a fixed cost to draw a productivity level. Yeah, they need to, of course, invest on understanding the industry. So let's take all of this kind of research to whether you want to enter the industry or not, whether you want to open the factory or not as the fixed cost, yeah, to find out whether you're good or not. So also high productivity level goes hand in hand with low cost of production, right? So if you're very productive, you can produce the goods in a very cheap way. On top of it, if you can produce cheaply, right, you can, then you are willing to offer low price, right? So high productivity level means low cost, means low price, okay? So let's take that relationship first in our mind, okay? So imagine that, this is from Melis and Trevor. Imagine that the horizontal axis here shows cost level, yeah? So the more you go to the right, the higher your cost, right? Higher cost. And remember, higher cost means low productivity, right? Or low productivity. If you go to the left, meaning that you are going to the place where you can produce things in cheap cost, in low cost, and high productivity, okay? So imagine that. So what also then apparent, the higher productivity firms, which are the one here, for example, will have higher profits. So the vertical axis shows profits level, yeah? Meanwhile, if you go to the right, for example, firms here, you have lower profit, okay? So the graph is only saying that. It looks very complicated, but it's actually not, okay? Another thing that we would like to mention is that we have operating profits and net profits. The difference is just net profit takes into account the fixed costs, the one that we pay before we know how productive we are. But the idea here, what matters is just the operating profit, right? Because the fixed cost is kind of like sunk cost. You already forgone that. As long as your operating profit is operating, let me just write it down. Profit, usually we call it pi, okay, yeah? So operating, as long as your operating profit is bigger than 0, you enter the market or you stay in the market, yeah, stay. If operating profit is negative, you exit the market, okay? So those firm, here is 0, yeah? So firm here, because the operating profit is kind of negative or 0, this will exit. Meanwhile, firms with this level of cost level or productivity stay in the market, okay? Okay, now how can we put this framework into trade? First, what does trade means? Trade means opening up of market, right? Market integration. You get more customers, right? If you, for example, you have a warung, right? For example, a toko, like a shop, pop and mom shop, and then now you put your shop into a platform like, I don't know, Tokopedia. It means that you are opening up yourself to a bigger market, right? So trade basically is a market integration or opening up the market. What does it mean to your demand? So this is a demand curve. First, it means more competition, right? So for those that can only offer higher price, it means more competition. But for those that can offer lower price, which means the one that is more productive, it's also more competition but bigger market, right? Now they can attract more people that for more demand, right? So what happened is that the demand for each firm as we enter new market or as we open up to trade is that the demand curve move from here to this. So a little bit it pivots, yeah? That's the new demand, okay? What does it mean to our operating profit is the following. So for those that are very productive, their operating profit goes up, yeah? So here it was before, this is the operating profit, but now for that firm here, the operating profit is here, okay? But for those that are not productive, then you enter to more competition, your operating profit goes down. So for example, if the firm has this level of cost, the profit was here, this, but now it's smaller, right? So now we see trade can have several impacts, yeah? Trade, opening up to trade can give you the one that is very productive, higher profit, right? So up until this, so for a firm in this level, they are the winners because their profit goes up, right? For those that are here, they become kind of losers because their profit goes down, but they stay in the market, okay? For those who are here, this is another type of losers because it's not only their profit goes down, they exit the market entirely, okay? So now we can see that opening up to trade is not only like as beautiful of, you know, you export things and then you import other things, but within your industry, some people may win more and some people may lose, right? So it is in more contemporary world, this is what's actually happening, okay? So some, for example, we're very famous of, we're kind of good on producing textile, right? But when we open up to trade, some firms that produce textile actually win, they increase profits. Some actually lose because they face higher competition because then their profit goes down. Some needs to exit the market because they just cannot bear the competition as before, okay? So it's not as black and white, okay? Now, let's make it a little bit more complicated, right? So what about differentiating between in domestic market and export market? So when a firm wants to enter an export market, imagine there is like trade costs in entering an export market. For example, they need to establish a network in new market, or they need to find out, you know, certain paperwork to be able to export, right? Let's call this trade cost T, right? So it means then the profit will be also deducted by T. That's why now for domestic, we have two different types of profit function. One is the operating profit for domestic market. So this is not, you don't have to subtract trade costs because you just sell domestically. But if you export, you need to subtract this trade cost. So you have a different operating profit for exporters, which is a bit shorter, okay? I mean, you shifts down the profit functions. So now you have a different type of profiles too for firms, right? So let me just Sorry, my cat drop things, wants to make an opinion on exporting and not. So imagine you are a firm with this level of cost, yeah, this level of productivity. So if you sell domestically, you have a positive profit here, right? So it means that, okay, you will stay in domestic, you will sell in domestic market. Can you sell in export market? Let's see how much of operating profit you get from exporting. Oh, you can still get positive profit. So for that firm, let's call it firm A, they will sell domestic in domestic market plus export market. Yeah. Let's take a different firm. Let's see that they are here. Yeah, let's call firm B. Firm B, sorry, this is firm A. Firm B has positive operating profit in domestic market, right? So they will stay in domestic market, just keep selling in Jakarta and other parts of the world, other parts of Indonesia, for example, and stayed in the producing. But can they export? So here at this point, they don't have positive operating profit from export. So they will not export, right? Meanwhile, for let's see another firm, let's see this, firm C, we see that both operating profit domestic and export is not positive. So they will just exit. So you have three different types of firms. One is the one that sell domestically and that sell in export markets. Let's call it exporters. One type that only sell domestically but not in export, and some that will just exit. Okay. So that's why we see, okay, Indonesia is so good in textile industry, for example, but not every firms are exporters, right? Because different firms may have different productivity level. Some can sell domestically and export, but some can only sell domestically because they're not as productive as the one that can export, okay? So next, last graph from this exercise, what happened if trade costs reduce? So when we, for example, an effect of trade liberalizations. So this trade cost goes down. This is what a simplification of trade liberalizations. So for domestic firm, it means that other firms from outside can also sell in our country, right? So that's why for domestic firms, it becomes more competition. That's why the profit function shifts down, right? Because each firm will face more competition. But for those that also in the export market, less trade costs or more or trade liberalization means cheaper trade costs, cheaper way to export. So, and more market, right? So their operating profit goes up. Yeah. So in that sense, in the impact of trade liberalization, we again have some winners and losers. So we have those, for example, here, firm that was not an exporters, and only sell domestically. But now, since the operating profit at that point becomes positive, they become new exporters. So between this and this. But also there are domestic firms that were actually producing, right? Because let me just use different color. Before the trade liberalization, they are profitable enough, right? This is the profit function, the profit level. But after the liberalization, they are not productive. Their operating profit is zero. So this all firm in this productivity level exit the market. Okay. So again, we have some winners and some losers, right? So it's not as plain vanilla, everyone gains or like, okay, let's trade liberalize things that we're very good at, for example, textile or garments, and that everyone in that industry will gain. It's not as simple as that. Okay, even very very easy model like this can show that. Okay, so now that we covered some ideas of how we can see trade and development, right? We would like, of course, to have more winners if we open up to trade, right? And then less losers if we open up to trade. Okay. So, but we see that when countries open up more, they become richer. So there is a seminal paper. Let's now cover the evidence. Some papers say there is a seminal paper by Frankel and Romer that try to tackle this problem. Of course, there is a problem of endogeneity. So because countries that trade more becomes richer because they can trade to more countries, but countries that are richer are usually more productive, so they trade more, right? So how do they do that? How do they tackle this problem? Is they use geographical features as instrumental variables to isolate only one way. So only the impact from trade to development. And they do find trade has positive effect on income. So in cross-country sample, we see that more countries that trade more has better development. Okay, so quite positive evidence, yeah, from trade from each other. We also see that when we see trade, more trade means also not only opening up to trade, but also reduction of trade costs. So one way of reduction of trade costs is when a country invests on transportation, right? So it becomes cheaper to trade between regions or between countries. So this is what Donaldson paper is about. He used a context of colonial India. So this is back in the 1800, 1700. And he shows that, so during that time, the British Empire built a lot of railroads in India. It means that it's a reduction of transportation costs, right? Because now it's easier to transport goods from one part of the country to the other part of the country. And he found that reduction in trade costs due to better transportation, reduce interregional price gaps, because then each region can trade with each other. So the difference between one region to the other becomes smaller. Increase interregional and international trade. So they trade more within the country and with other parts of India, and with other countries. And increase real income, because they trade more, then some people can have can get better price for what they produce, and can get lower price with what they usually consume. Okay, so it's quite good. Do we see everything like this? Of course, we also see some evidence when it's not as beautiful or it's not as pretty. So there is a big paper in 2013 that kind of changed the international trade framework when an author, Dorn and Hansen, shows that the paper called the China Syndrome Shock. So they studied the impact of rising Chinese imports to the US. So during the 90s and to the 2000s, there are two things happening. First, China joined the WTO in 2001, right? So it's a big manufacturer becomes part of the WTO. And when you becomes part of the WTO, then it means that not only China has to reduce tariff, but also they can also get lower tariff from all parts of the members of WTO, right? And also they experience technological progress. So they become even a better manufacturers, right? So one thing that we find as an impact is that US imports way more from China, yeah, especially manufacturers. And then what they find, author Dorn and Hansen, is that a rising imports, so local labor markets in the US that got higher exposure of these imports, get higher unemployment, lower labor participation, and reduce wages in local labor markets, especially those that house import competing manufacturing industries. So for example, if US import a lot of textile or a lot of cars from China, then local labor markets in the US or cities in the US that also produce that, they have more reduced wages. So it means that having more trade in this case is harmful for many US local labor markets. Why is that so? So one of the problem is that what so far in the model shows is that not only we see some people wins and lose, but this model also sometimes are static, right? So it means that they don't take into account that it's hard for people to move from import competing industry to export industries, right? So in the model, it's so easy for people to just, the export sector grow and then the import sector shrink. It means people just, change job from import competing industry to export industry, right? But in the real world, it's not as easy, of course, right? And this is what author Dorn and Hansen show. Even in developed economies like US, where there are trade assistance, there are assistance to retraining, right? From if you want to move across sectors as a laborer, for example, and there are many grants to that promotes new industry. Even in that situation, let alone in developing countries, it's not as flow. It's not as easy to move across sector and to have this transition between one equilibrium to another. Okay. So having that in mind, many countries then, as recently also, since we were in a trade war era in the past couple of years, people countries start to come back again to trade policies. Trade policies are just basically policy that try to tweak this export and import behavior. So sometimes the intention is actually valid, right? Most of the time the intention is valid, right? But sometimes not, okay? Countries may have interest in using trade policies to protect or support certain industries or to protect consumers, as what we see recently in Indonesia. Indonesia now start to ban export of CPO with the intention so that many of our consumers can have affordable minyak goreng. What's the English? Cooking oil, right? Cooking oil. So the intention is there, but of course, as a trade economist, any government can have many policy that you can choose. So here I just put out several type of trade policy, including the typical import tariff, import quota. The difference is import tariff is on price, so you just add some price on every imports that you want to buy. Import quota means that you only restrict a number of quantity of imports, so you can only import certain number of, I don't know, whatever that you put quota in. Export subsidies, for example, you want to promote certain export, you give some subsidies. Currently, we have export bans in Indonesia for cooking oil CPO. For example, this is to have a blanket between in domestic market and world market. Whether it's effective or not, that's a question, of course. The first four are what we call more traditional trade policies. Recently, there are a lot of different trade policies that are what we call more modern. For example, standard harmonization. So, for example, when there's an international organization that set international standard, and then whether the standards are ratified or adopted by different countries or like that. Or not, right? So that's a more contemporary one. Or trade-related intellectual property rights. That's also a more recent development, right? Why are this type of trade policies become now more prevalent? Is of course because since we have WTO, import tariff has gone down worldwide. So there's not so much room for import tariff actually, because it's actually quite low right now. Of course, what Trump did in the US and the trade war between the US and China changed things, that we start to become in a world where import tariff is become high again, have become high again. But we'll see whether this is something that is going to last or not, right? But since on average import tariff has gone kind of low, then these are the ones that are kind of new right now. But let's start with like something that traditional, yeah? So for example, import tariff. So let's assume the country is a small open economy, meaning that they cannot influence world price, yeah? So under world price, the price is this level, yeah? So at home, the supply is this function and the demand is this function. If they open up to trade, of course, the supply, the amount of supply that domestic firm would like to supply is up until as high as 1, right? Meanwhile, under that price, the domestic demand is D1, right? So the difference between the two is what they import, okay? So they import D1 minus S1, okay? If the country imposes an import tariff, then the new price in domestic market is just the world price plus import tariff, right? So the new price now is PW plus the import tariff or T, right? So this is the relevant domestic price right now. So now under this new import tariff, then there are more supply domestically, right? So now domestic firms are willing to supply S2. And because the price is now higher, then less demand domestically, right? So the demand is now D2. So under import, under new tariff, the import is D2 minus S2, meaning lower imports, right? So what's the cause of this and what's the problem of this? Of course, now there are some part of the society, which is D, that without the import tariff, they could have consumed the products, right? But now, since the product has become more expensive, they could not, yeah? So that's one part of what we call deadweight loss. Another part of the deadweight loss or cost of this policy is this area B. This area B shows there are some producers that were not competitive enough in the world market under the world price. But since the price has become higher due to the import tariff, then they become profitable enough, right? So they can sell, but they are not the most productive ones, right? So that becomes a cost to the economy, right? So these two parts becomes the cost of the import tariff, yeah? Having this cost, why is that? Why some countries would like to do that, right? Why countries do import tariff? Of course, sometimes they would like, they have some, some hope, maybe the government that, oh, maybe if I give some of this new domestic firm that can produce some chances to produce, they will learn and then they become more productive. So basically the hope is to shift the supply curve to the right. Whether it happens or not, of course, it's kind of a gamble, or it's not always sure. Some countries succeed, some not, right? So if it's easy to find out what's the determinant of success and failures, then every country will be will be rich already. But unfortunately, it's not as easy. So some countries actually succeed, and this is what we call a successful infant industry policy, but some not, right? So since we only have a little bit of time, I'm not going to go to quota, but let's see what works and what not, yeah? So I think in Keisha's class before, we also covered this, and let me provide some examples, okay? some positive impacts that we find from trade policy. So South Korea actually did not put, what works was not putting trade import tariff. What they did is they get rid of some of import tariff in the 1960s, especially on intermediate inputs and capital goods, but only if those products are used to produce exports. So they particularly asked to that. So the firms, if they want to get tariff exemption, they need to show, oh, I sell this to other countries. If they only sell it to Korea, they don't get the tariff exemptions. So Connolly and Yi show that this policy can explain 17% of growth in Korean GDP over the period, which is during this time, Korean GDP per capita escalate. They become from one of the poorest country after the war, because they just experienced war with Japan, to one of the, as you see now, one of the main engine of the world, right? Like growth engine. So this looks small, right? 17%, but they say this is the lower bound because at the same time, they also did other things. They invest on schools, they invest on, transportation. So on this is kind of like the lower bound of at least the policy can explain this, at least, yeah. So this trade liberalization works. Yeah. So basically the trade policy is to liberalize. In Indonesian case, trade liberalization also works. Some works, yeah, some. Which one? This is also interesting. So it's sometimes it's not the same liberalizing this product with the other, yeah. So we did a big trade reforms in the 1990s, especially as we entered WTO in the 1995. So tariff across industry dropped. Yeah, not only on output products, but also input products. Yeah, so not only on things that you buy for directly consumption, but also on inputs, like for example, for machines or parts and components. But the difference is that they show that productivity gains were higher for tariff reduction on inputs, so not on outputs. So firms in Indonesia actually get better, or they improve their productivity if they benefit from less tariff on their imported inputs. So some imports are actually good, and if they can, which is in this case is inputs, and if this inputs becomes cheaper because less tariff that they need to pay, then these firms that enjoy it, they become more productive. Yeah, so that's for Indonesia's case. So in this case, trade liberalization, some trade liberalization also work. Yeah? Let's see a different type of liberalization that caused a less beautiful, less happy ending. Yeah. So there is a paper by Topalova. This is also a very big seminal paper. She studied the impact of India's trade liberalization in 1991. She found that, and also in this case, the trade liberalization was across the board also, just the one that like what Indonesia did. She found that districts that were more exposed to liberalization, so those that produce also a big import competition, have slower decline in poverty. So they cannot reduce poverty fast, and lower consumption growth. Basically, they are poor for longer time. Yeah. So trade liberalization kind of harmful for these districts, right? And one of the problem or mechanism behind it is that in India there is inflexible labor laws which dampen labor reallocations. So what's the idea behind it? So the idea is that if this district got exposed a lot on liberalization, of course, then the price of the products that they sell goes down, right? So if the price of what they sell goes down, you expect they become less profitable. So also then those who work in that industry will have lower wages, right? The idea, and some of them maybe got unemployed. If these people can move to other districts that get higher price due to the trade liberalization, then things can go smooth, right? The trade liberalization can be can create gain. But if these people stuck in that districts, first they already get lower wage, or some of them get laid off, and they cannot move out of that district to get a better to district that get better impact. Then this is the case when trade liberalization can create some harms. Yeah. So this is an less beauty and happy ending. Another less happy ending happened in Brazil. This is also another case of trade liberalization in Brazil. It was also across the board, and they also found regions that face high exposure, so larger tariff cuts, experience prolonged reduction in employment and earnings. So less employment, lower earnings too. And this impact also even lingered 20 years for a long time, right? We imagine things may change after 5 years because people should be able to move out, right? But what they find, since there is imperfect labor mobility, again, people cannot move easily across sector, across regions, and there is slow capital adjustment. So for example, if there are some capital that should be reinvested in a better industry, if this doesn't happen as fast, then it's not as easy, this adjustment is not as simple. So the trade liberalization can actually be painful. Okay, so how about Indonesia? I don't know. Let me just finish this with asking you, where was it? The next question, and then before we go to the next one, so let me ini nggak usah deh. Let me go to the next one, which is here. What challenges we need to take into account so that Indonesia can benefit from world trade? So please go to Slido, and then I'm happy to have a question and answer after this. I think I ran out of time actually. I'm sorry, Kisha.
No worries. Just when this one's Slido, and then I think we can open the Q&A right away. Yes. I guess. Yes. So yeah. So anyone who wants to raise questions or maybe comments, please do raise your hand. But if you would like me to kind of read your questions, you can write down your questions on the chat box. So either way. But for students, I encourage you to raise your hand and address your questions directly, because that's the point of this discussion and Q&A. Balancing between export and imports.
Dependency on primary goods. We already dependent on primary goods. Self-innovation, but the question is what challenges, Kiki? Maybe that's the challenge. Okay. I'm sorry. What challenges?
Right? Because
that's the challenges.
Too much on the primary goods.
To stay competitive in a global market, make it balanced with sustainability. I like this. Me too. How? Low value added of exported goods. Yes. Okay, I know. I mean, I'm ending it with a little bit kind of depressing tone. Maximizing FTA and Siapa. Nice. Yes. Improve labor productivity. I know how. Improve labor productivity.
While we're waiting, actually, Abizar has question. Abizar,
yes, please do. Do you have any questions? Yes. I'll let this to still going, and if anyone can.
Yeah, we can just leave it.
Yeah, Abizar, do you want
the Q&A?
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to ask something about the developing countries' decision on going to protectionism policy. So as far as my understanding, in the textbook, we rather talk about the merits and harm ongoing for the trade pessimist. In the textbook, the Sodara and Smith explain whether the developing country should impose a protectionism policy, not whether the developing country could impose a protectionism. So for me personally, it's a bit unclear whether the developing country could impose the protectionism policy. Developing country can afford to close the trade to other developed country. So as far as my understanding, protectionism requires the countries to be self-sufficient in that particular industry. I think that protectionism does make more sense for developed country rather than developing country. When the industry already run the gear, industry already established, they only need to innovate and protect domestic producer and attain local customer, right? That's the point for protectionism policy. As for developing country, it is as if they don't have any other choice other than trading with other country, with developed country. They don't have any other choice other than trade liberalization, imposing tariffs and quotas and whatnot. So they cannot afford to do protectionism as they don't have the capability to self-suffice the country, self-suffice the country demands, or the household consumption may have lower quality goods, and might lower the welfare as well. The disadvantage of protectionism policy. So it goes with my question. My question is that on what condition, on what circumstances that countries' industry, where they are ready to start to imposing tariffs, start to do a protectionism, start implements infant industry policy without harming the country's future development on the particular industry. I think that's my question, Miss.
I hope I understand the question correctly. As you can see, I only give you like simple analysis of tariff under small open economy, right? So tariff can actually be can have positive gain for the country if they are large open economy. Large doesn't mean always developed economies. It's just when they can affect world price. Yeah. So Indonesia, for example, may not be small open economy for certain products, but they are a large open economy actually in certain products. Yeah. So it's not about, I think one of them is not about develop or developing, but more how big you are in the market of that particular commodity, right? But most of the time, since this is many countries produce the same thing, most of the time, most countries are small open economy. So any protection will have some cost or harm to the consumers at least, right? But sometimes for consumers, you spread the cost across lots of people, so you don't really feel it, right? So that's why for many countries, it's still politically feasible to still do protectionism, despite economically you actually lose. And for example, if they are sure, or they want to not sure, if they want to take the chance that some probability of success and some probability of failures of infant industry, right? It's kind of like a gamble, but policymakers maybe can have some calculation, and also the private sector can have some calculation that they can say that, oh, we do have some higher probability of success relative to probability of failures, right? So whether you can shift the supply curve to the right or not, basically that, right? So another thing that I think I would like to emphasize is that sometimes trade protections are second best policy to what the actual problems are. So many countries take it because it's easier, right? You just have to work with your own custom, and then do some tariff, right? But the main problem maybe is not whether you are you're not competitive, then you need to give some incentive for the domestic firm to produce, but more about, for example, lack of capital, right? Maybe the problem is actually these firms have low capital, so we need them to produce at least so they can save some revenue to reinvest this capital. But the first problem is actually maybe capital inflow, right? So there are many problems. There can be some other problems that that actually lingers. Like, for example, here, how can we improve labor productivity? That's the main problem, right? That's a structural problem. But since we want the industry to still actually keep afloat, let me just give some protection. So despite labor productivity doesn't change, at least they produce something, right? So the trade policy is actually the second best policy for the actual problem, which is how can we improve labor productivity, something like that. So I cannot give you like if it's easy to pinpoint what determines, when to protect and when not, then international trade economists should not do any more research. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, they will be jobless. Anyway, I think that also relates to one of the questions in the chat box by Aditya Satria. He has given how trade conditionally impacts development, and it can depend on other factors such as institutions, to what limits we can use trade for development. So yeah, if the trade policy is second best, the actual problem is the development factor, which is productivity, for example, Kiki. So I think I'm also curious, in your 2 cents, in your opinion, what limits can we use trade for development? Not only growth, but development.
So I'm a more pro-trade people, but I understand, I think recent trade economists are aware of the distributional impacts of trade, right? As we see, like in the US, like the paper by author Dorn Hansen kind of like, okay, many people in the US can buy cheap products, but at the cost, some people actually bear the cost of, they don't get, the industry kind of dies off, right? So, I think if we say the trade itself, as long as trade is done, non-discriminatory, I think it's actually good. What the problem is whether we can help the economy to reallocate fast. As we see before, like using the Melis Traffel model, like with heterogeneous firm, even with the best intention, we see some firms of best intention of market integration, like opening up. Some firms gain, right? Like there are more exporters, right? And if we liberalize, there are more new exporters, right? But there are firms that needs to exit. So I think the issue is more how we can help reallocation to be less costly and more flowy.
Okay, right, cool. Right, I think here's what I'm going to do, because I know some students have another period of the 4th period. So the 4th period usually starts at 4:30 actually, but I think some classes kind of move earlier to 4. So if there are any students who would like to raise questions again, I will prioritize your questions. Maybe one more. Any other questions?
I'll share the slides too to Keisha and the Mikdash.
Oh yeah, we will share the slides, and I think we will upload as usual any events under Mikdash. We will upload the video on YouTube, but let me check with Faiz, but that's the plan actually. Even if it's a guest lecture, that is part of a Mikdash event. So yeah. But anyway, guys, we still have some opportunity, 1 or 2 minutes. Is there any more questions while Kiki is in the house? Well, we will invite Kiki for other events under either under Mikdash or maybe Mikdash, because we have several research dashboard under the Department of Economics laboratory. So yeah, just stay tuned and keep updated in our social media.
Let me also promote Mikdash. So Mikdash is a micro dashboard that Keisha founded at UGM. So
not me founded, I was assigned actually.
For those that are not economy students and at UGM, like watch out this platform. They have lots of things coming up and very exciting events.
All right, thank you, Kiki. So I think we're gonna have a memento picture time before we end the session. Yup. We have lots of students in here, so it's really an honor, I think, for all of us, especially for my development economics class, to have other lecturer other than myself who's very topic. Hopefully, you guys use this opportunity to kind of get more insights and get more different point of view from Kiki is an academic, but she's a practitioner in trade. I'm not. I'm a labor economist more. So Mikdash team, can we start with the momento, because I think some of the
thank you for coming, everyone, and stick around for my lengthy lecture.
And mine, and especially those who just joined mine, I think you guys are like, we already did it one lecture. So yeah, if everyone can just turn on their video for a moment, so that our team can get a picture. And I would like to ask either Faiz or maybe Noval, or I don't know, do we have Mikdash team to kind of give an instruction? What should we do? And yeah, please to turn on everyone. I think.
Okay. Everyone, please turn on your camera. And
Tapi aku cuma lihat dua muka aku sama Kisha deh. Ini karena di pin ya?
Oh, yeah. Wait.
Ya? Aku kayak, where are people?
We've got like more than 50 before everyone.
Oh, rame ya. Thank you guys for sticking around. And yeah, I in the slides you will see my email. Let me know if you have any more questions or just drop me an email.
Okay, I'm gonna take the picture. 3, 2, 1. Okay, once again.
I'm so not used to like this picture at Zoom. Gimana sih cara orang pada foto?
Okay, once
again. We only can see like half of it, so yeah.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, done.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining this session, especially for my students. Thank you for participating. Hopefully it gives you some new air other than having me in your class all the time. But yeah, for everyone else who's not from FEB UGM or maybe not from UGM, we really thank you for joining us this afternoon and staying with us. And yeah, I mean, future events, maybe with Kiki or maybe with other colleagues from Kiki's uni or by the way, Mikdash has this program inviting speakers from other university. So please visit our promoting this event. So yeah, but please do visit our social media, because the idea is like to share your research or maybe your to public as well. So that's the atmosphere that we're trying to build at Mikdash UGM, like the atmosphere of speaking, talking, and sharing ideas, because there's no right and wrong in economics. It's just different point of view. And so students, that's why I also always encourage you to speak up, and speak up. Anyway, thank you, Kiki, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for
my invitation. And yeah, thanks everyone. And I know you got another class, especially for my students. So I'm going to close this session. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And students, we'll see you next week. We'll still have 1 more week.
Survive, Kisha, guys. Okay, you got this. Bye.
Stay tuned with Kisha for 1 more week. Anyway, thank you everyone. If you want to contact Kiki, I think we will share the class and there's your email. Okay.
Thank you.
Kiki. Bye. Nanti dihubungin Rani ya, Ki.
Okay.
Thank you, Kak Kiki.
Thank you juga. And congrats, Rani.
Thank you so much.
I should say it in the front. Sorry. Congrats ya.
Thank you.
Ada SE baru.
Bye.
Bye. Kuliah, thank you.